Well, hi everybody. My name is Professor Carola Dillenberger from Queen's University. I'm the Director for the Centre for Behaviour Analysis, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here. I've been looking at the chat, and we have truly people from all across the globe. It is absolutely incredible. I'm not going to even list the countries. You can have a look at the chat. It's very, very interesting. But it gives me great pleasure also to introduce to you Dr. Stephen Gallagher. Stephen has been a colleague of ours for a very long time. He works at the University at Ulster University. Stephen is a senior lecturer in behaviour analysis in the School of Psychology at Ulster University. He's a course director of the Masters in Applied Behaviour Analysis there, and he is also a board-certified behaviour analyst doctoral designation. He's also the chairperson of the parent-led charity called Parents Education as Autism Therapists, which has been running for over 20 years in Northern Ireland. His research interests include parent training, early behavioural intervention for children diagnosed with autism, dementia, increasing social interaction and independence amongst institutionalized elderly, and using eye tracking equipment as a tool to teach appropriate gaze behaviour in relation to areas such as food labelling and social stimuli. For 7 years, Stephen has worked in the community as a consultant behaviour analyst in the local charity Parents Education as Autism Therapists, where he helped to create simple steps, and I'm sure maybe we'll hear more about that today. His role involved designing and implementing home and school-based ABA programmes for children and adults with autism, and before joining the School of Education at Ulster University in 2007. So, Stephen, we've been friends for a long time. We've been colleagues for even longer, or just as long. It gives me great pleasure. I'm just delighted to have you here at the Centre for Behaviour Analysis to deliver a webinar for our 2025 annual webinar series. I'm going to leave the presentation and let you tear away and let you get on with it. And anybody who has questions, there's a question mark in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Please place your questions in there so that they don't get lost in the chat. The other thing you need to know, there will be an attendance check. There will be 4 attendance checks, in fact, and you need to click on 3 of those. We have technical support in the background, so if there's any problems, we'll sort it out. But when you hear a ding and a red sign comes up, please make sure that you click that you attend, because you must have 3 of those clicked to get your CEUs. So hopefully that's fairly clear. And I'll hand over to you, Stephen. Okay?
Okay, Carol. Well, thank you very much for those kind words, and thank you for everybody for turning up. It truly is a very international audience we'll have tonight, so I will try and slow down my normally very fast Belfast accent that everybody can understand me okay. So, as Carola said, before taking my post at Ulster University in the School of Psychology, I worked in the community, and my job for 7 years was to travel around Northern Ireland, either to homes or to schools, to put in place behavioural programmes for young children and adults who had a diagnosis of ASD. And it became very clear very quickly that, whilst our main focus when we were working with the kids was going to be the needs of the child and their behavioural excesses and the various things that we needed to work on with the child, it became very obvious to me very quickly that each time we went into a family home, we were very much going into a situation that was completely unique. So we may have had a family with a sort of traditional mum and dad with a stay-at-home parent who would usually be the mother. We would also have maybe families who were single parents. We would have families where the only child was the child with a diagnosis. We had other families where they had the child with a diagnosis, but they maybe had 2 or 3 other children, some of those who may have also had diagnoses. So we very much learned very quickly that when we went into a family home, obviously the program that we're putting in place is completely unique for every family that we visit, but the situation for each of those families is also completely unique as well. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that we learned those lessons and were able to build that into our programs to make sure that when we left a family home, that family knew exactly what it was they were supposed to be doing. They'd watched us working with the child. We'd watched them working with the child, and we left that family in a nice positive situation. And really, I think, when we look back in time at the work that was going on there, and even beforehand, when we look at when Pete was founded by Professor Mickey Keenan back in 1987, we very much realized that the parent training was an absolutely sort of key initiative in what we needed to do. And that really has been our focus since the beginning of Parents Education's Autism Therapist and all the years since. So I really just kind of want to spend the rest of today's talk just talking through some of the experiences that I've had over those years and the positive then therapeutic interventions that allows us to put in place. So again, I mean, you guys are going to be completely aware of this. But I mean, if we look at the number of children and young people who are being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, we can see that the World Health Organization's figures from 2023 was 1 in 100 children worldwide. If we then look at the United States in particular, we have the CDCP, and their figures were 1 in 36 children in the United States. But if we then bring things closer to home for ourselves here in Northern Ireland, the Department of Health and Social Services and Public Safety have a figure of 1 in 20 school children. So I do an awful lot of work with teachers, and sometimes teachers are quite concerned about the fact that they have an ever-increasing number of children who are coming into mainstream school, and they're quite startled by some of these figures. And I think it's nearly starting to get to the stage now where the teachers are taking it for granted that they're going to have at least one child in their class every year who has additional educational needs. So the issues are I feel like are growing all the time. The numbers are growing, and that's something that we need to take into consideration as we move forward. In Northern Ireland, we have an interesting situation where the statutory services are absolutely they're a breaking point. They're under a huge amount of pressure. So when we have headlines such as from the BBC here saying that the proportion of Northern Ireland pupils with a diagnosis has quadrupled over a number of years. So that's something that we very much have to take into consideration, that the stresses and strains that the statutory services are under. And I suppose our thought has always been that what we wanted to do was to try and get in and help families as early as possible. So before maybe a child was at school age, the parents are able to work on behavioural programs and have that level of impact. So it's getting that information to the parents as quickly as possible is something that we really kind of want to focus on there. So we have headlines such as that, with the number of kids quadrupling. Because the services are under so much pressure, we have an additional problem, which is that we have a huge number of children in Northern Ireland who are on a waiting list. And the problem with the children being on the waiting list, obviously, is that what's happening is that if the children are on the waiting list, the family are, as we say in this part of the world, spinning their wheels. They're not moving forward. They can't move forward until they get a diagnosis for their child. And again, our philosophy has always been, especially at Parents Education's Autism Therapists and the work we've done with Simple Steps, is that, for a family to come and access our help, they never needed to have a diagnosis. They just had to have a suspected diagnosis. And what that allowed us to do was put programs into place. Now, if 18 months, which is a normal amount of time for a family to have to wait, if after 18 months the child does get a diagnosis of ASD, well, at least there's an 18-month head start that the family have had. If it turns out that the child doesn't have a diagnosis of ASD after those 18 months, but maybe some other diagnosis, well, at least the family have had a chance to work on problems or behaviours that they're worried about for an 18-month period. So they're hitting the ground running, and that's really key to it. But those waiting lists are a huge strain on our statutory services as we speak. Now, this is a programme that appeared on the BBC in Northern Ireland, UK. It will probably be available on BBC iPlayer to some, and there's a lot of people from overseas. But if you're able to get a look at the programme, I mean, this really kind of sums the whole programme up. We're basically, we have a situation in this particular programme called Spotlight, where we have these 4 families who appeared on the television program, and what was happening was they just basically didn't have the support to help them with their children. Their children were now in their teens. They were bigger than their mums, physically stronger than their mums, and their mums were having a huge amount of problems dealing with their child and dealing with their behaviour issues. And I'll not lie to you, I mean, it was quite harrowing in places to watch the programme, where you were, and especially at the stage where you were looking and thinking, if that family had had access to something like Simple Steps or something like behaviour analysis when the child was only 2 or 3 years of age, they wouldn't be where they're at now. And just these poor families are at breaking point. It's something that I think we just have to be so careful about, because these families are incredibly vulnerable. This particular lady here, it was quite a sad story, where she dropped her child off at school and went home. And then she just basically phoned up the school and says, I'll not be picking him up. I can't cope anymore. I just don't know what to do with my child. And there was a mother who was absolutely at the end of her tether. And as I was watching the programme, again, all I could think was, well, if that family had had the help that we're in a position to offer those years ago, then she wouldn't be in the situation she's in now. So if anybody wants to try and find that on BBC iPlayer, then certainly that would be something I think would be worthwhile. So all this is leading me to the major point for this evening, which is what we really need to do is we need to have effective parent training. I mean, parents know their child better than anybody else. Parents spend more time with their child than anybody else. They're the experts in their own child. As far as I'm concerned, those parents are an untapped resource, from the point of view that if we can help the parents to help their kids, that's going to give everything a really good push right from the very beginning, and it's something that we should be aiming for. So, but one other thing we need to remember is that the parents of children with ASD are incredibly vulnerable, from the point of view that they're struggling, they're under an awful amount of pressure, they've got a lot of things going on in their lives, and they'll do anything they want. They'll do anything they can to help their child. I'm a parent. If something was wrong with one of my children, I would literally do anything to help them. And unfortunately, there are some people who will take advantage of that. And our job, I believe, is to make sure that when we work with families, what we're doing is we are giving them information and evidence and research to tell them what are the best things to do to help their child. So it's our job to act as a guardian for those families, because we want to make sure that they're not being given misinformation, or they're being told about therapies that are quick fixes. And there's all sorts of things going on out there in the World Wide Web. We want to make sure that that we're protecting those parents as best as we can. So as we've seen over the first number of slides there, the number of children being diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder is rising, and there's a growing number of children waiting to be diagnosed. That's the exact situation we have in Northern Ireland. I know we have exactly the same situation in the Republic of Ireland and in the rest of the UK, and I'm sure probably for some of those international colleagues who are joining us this evening, it's more or less the same story going on in your own part of the world as well. But the point being that despite the fact that it's the parent who carries the greatest burden of caring for their children, there's been little investment in effective parent training, and that's really where we want to come in and make some sort of cultural and sea change there. Now, I put this little screen up. Hopefully you can maybe see the important figure, but I put this in today that I mentioned earlier on that families with children with ASD are very vulnerable, and there's an awful lot of misinformation out there. And I just simply went into Google today and put in autism spectrum disorder into the search engine, and this is the important thing. There were 69,300,000 hits. Okay, and the scary thing is that the vast majority of that information is not worth the screen that it's printed on. I mean, really, at the end of the day, there's an awful lot of misinformation out there. There's an awful lot of really sort of crazy stuff being put out there on the internet when we have people advising parents to give their child diluted bleach in order to get rid of autism, and all sorts of things that are appearing on the internet. There's some really sort of scary information out there, and we want to make sure that the information that's getting out to the parents is scientifically correct, and we're basically giving the parents information that will be of use to them. Now, that sounds straightforward, but I mean, a number of years ago, I went to a talk in Belfast where we met with the National Autistic Society, which is a large autism charity in the UK. And the whole idea was that what they were going to do is bring everybody up on stage to talk about the different therapies that were available. So I was there representing applied behaviour analysis. There was other people there were representing Teach. Other people were maybe doing the Sunrise program or whatever other programs that there were. And the interesting thing was that the head of research for the National Autistic Society was there. And he was basically stood up and he says, look, some of these therapies have evidence, and he talked about the behavioral therapies, and he talked about other therapies that didn't have evidence. And then the whole point was at the end of the conference, the health authorities in Northern Ireland were supposed to write up a document that basically outlined all the different therapies that existed and which ones were useful and which ones that weren't. So flash forward 3 months, and the document got published, and I couldn't believe it, because what actually happened was the document got published, and in it they just listed, here are therapies for autism spectrum disorder. And below applied behaviour analysis was trampoline therapy. Okay, so this wasn't a list of therapies that were useful or therapies that had been scientifically validated and proven to be effective. It was just a list of therapies. And I think that's doing parents an absolute disservice, that there's so much stuff out there on the internet about people doing all sorts of weird and wacky and crazy and wonderful things. But it should be our job that we should be putting information out there and saying to the parents, these are the things that work. These are the things that don't work. These are the things that are just downright dangerous. Okay, so it's very much our responsibility as professionals to do that. Now, as well as our job being to guard parents from the misinformation that's out there, another big part of what we need to think about when we go into a family home is that we're asking parents sometimes who are incredibly exhausted. They maybe have a child who doesn't sleep, but maybe sleeps for 1 or 2 hours a night and then straight back up again with their batteries recharged. And we're coming in and we wanted to put all these programs into place. And they've never learned about ABA before, and suddenly we're giving them this scientific program to put in place, and the parent can hardly keep their eyes open. We have to remember that parents are under an awful lot of stress, and there's lots and lots of research that to demonstrate that. So, and we're going back now almost 20 years, but myself and Corolla and Mickey Keenan and Tony Byrne and Alvin Doherty got some funding from the Royal Irish Academy to look at the needs of parents moving forward in time. So 20 years ago, almost, we put this document together, and it basically sort of looked at families, and the things that we noticed were that, for example, families were suffering from an awful lot of stress, and they were restricted in pursuing personal, educational, occupational, employment interests. So from a personal interest point of view, parents were giving up their hobbies, they were giving up their social needs in order to look after their child. They were maybe leaving full-time education, leaving degree courses, leaving other courses. So they were leaving full-time education to look after their child. Oftentimes we have parents who were leaving their jobs altogether. Now, again, that's probably the mother who's going to be doing that. So we see there's an awful lot of restriction on what's happening with parents and the stresses that follow that. Those parents also experience considerably more psychological distress than the general population. So if we look at the general population compared to families with children with ASD, it's off the charts for those families with kids with ASD. So 88% of those parents either reporting stress levels as high or quite stressed. We also find as well with the parents that we interviewed north and south of the border that we had higher levels of chronic health conditions. So 25% of the parents had chronic health conditions. And oftentimes those conditions are things like, for example, diabetes, heart disease, obesity. Those are the types of things that are affected by lifestyle. And obesity, heart disease, and diabetes are very much affected by stress as well. So those parents, because of the stress that they were suffering, also had the possibility of health issues and the knock-on effects from that. Talking to the parents, we also found that they felt that they weren't properly supported. So they felt that they did not receive sufficient support or advice and information during and after the diagnosis of their child and the statement process when they were having their educational placement sorted. We also noted significant distress when trying to access home, family, or respite support. So when the family maybe wanted to have their child go into respite for a weekend or to have somebody to come into the family home, they often found when they tried to do that through statutory services that they struggled to be able to do that. And as a result, what they tended to happen was to go for support that was from a non-statutory perspective. So they very much relied on family, or they very much relied on charitable organizations to step up. So that was another thing that brought about sort of high levels of stress for those families. And we also know of families then who have moved house to go to a different education area. They maybe moved county to get into a different education authority. Or we even know families who up sticks and went to the United States, changed country in order to access help for their family, and again, appropriate services for their children. So huge sacrifices being made by families for their children, which is completely understandable. And again, just to emphasize that whole point, this is why those parents are so vulnerable. It's because they are willing to make those sacrifices. But the biggest thing that they were concerned about, like any parent, and especially parents of children who have disabilities of some sort, is that they ask, what will happen to my child when I'm gone? What happens when I pass away? What happens if I become ill and can't look after them? So it's a huge source of stress for families. So we did this 20 years ago, almost. And lo and behold, now we're looking at pieces of research that are coming out from 2024, and it's demonstrating again that parents of children with ASD compared to parents of typically developing children have much higher levels of stress. So that hasn't changed in the last 20 years. That's something that we need to continually focus on to try and make things as palpable for those parents as we possibly can. Interestingly enough, a lot of research that suggests that if you take the normal population, they have stress levels at a particular level. If you then isolate families who have a child with any disability, then that family will have a higher level of stress. But if you then within that isolate ASD as opposed to the other developmental disabilities or even physical disabilities, the families with ASD have much higher rates of stress than those other cohorts as well. So that's an interesting aspect of ASD, and it would be interesting to see a bit of research about exactly what brings those higher levels about. You'll not be surprised, there's also lots of research to show that the higher levels of stress are linked to the severity of the symptoms. So obviously, the more severe the symptoms, the higher the levels of stress for the parents. Again, that's completely understandable. But all the research is out there to basically show that that's the situation that those families are in. If then we look at any family who has that level of stress in their lives, that's going to have added impact on marital problems within the family home. And when I was looking to see some sort of figures for divorce rates amongst families with children with ASD as opposed to the rest of the population, the reason I chose this particular paper was because it actually had this very much at a conservative level. So in this particular paper, it was 23.53% of families with kids with ASD divorced in comparison to only 13.8% of other families. But you can go into other papers and that could be 50, 60. The range of data that's coming out in these papers is quite broad. But in all of those papers, they're all reporting that the families with kids with ASD are suffering from higher rates of divorce than the rest of the family. So that's something to bear in mind as well. You know, when you walk into a family home for the first time, you know, that's probably one of the first things that I want to try and figure out. Are mom and dad both here? Are they separated? Are there step parents? You know, is there only one parent there? Again, these are all the things that we need to take into consideration. They can have big impacts on family programs as well. So, for example, if we have a situation where a child is maybe at home during the week with mum, but goes and stays with dad every fortnight at the weekend, one of the things we want to make sure is that we have consistency across the two home settings. Okay, so oftentimes, one parent may turn around and say, that when he or she comes back from the other parent, it takes me 3 or 4 days to get them back into that routine. And again, this is where we have to be very careful and very understanding and listen to the families and find out what's going on with them. That we want to make sure that we get them together and we're saying, look, the best thing we can do for your child is to have consistency across the environments. If we have consistency across the environments and consistency with our contingencies, then we're going to see consistency in the child's behaviour. So those are the types of things that we need to take into consideration when we're taking on board marital issues. And you guys will probably know yourselves, you're at university, you do your master's in behaviour analysis and you become board certified, but very quickly you kind of sharpen your if you like your people skills and your diplomatic skills when you're going into family homes and trying to balance home programs that might be happening across maybe more than one home space for a particular child. So that's something we very much have to take into consideration when we're going into family homes. A huge amount then of stress for parents comes about with issues around employment. And there's a charity in mainland Britain called Ambitious About Autism, and they did some research across their members. And they found that 30% of parents said that they had given up their job as a result of school exclusions. So because of behavioural issues or because of the child struggling from academic issues or because of the child self-excluding from school and were repeatedly being sent home from school, 30% of parents within this particular group said they had to give up their job to look after their child full time. So that's almost a third of parents, which is absolutely huge. Another 29% had said they had missed days from work. So, for example, they couldn't go into work because their child would refuse to go to school or was being sent home from school, having been expelled or suspended. So a huge knock-on effect there from an employment and a stress level point of view as well. 20% of parents also said they'd reduce their working hours to part-time in order to facilitate all the issues around schooling that were going on with their young person. Now, here's the interesting thing. Parents also reported an increase in the number of unlawful exclusions affecting their children, with 56% saying their child had been sent home early, worked on a reduced timetable, or asked not to come back, not to go on a school trip without an official letter being received. So a lot of these exclusions were happening, not necessarily going down the most official route, and this is obviously having a big impact on families as well. And in 2016, 45% of parents reported that their child had suffered an unlawful school exclusion. So they were excluded from school without following the usual guidelines. And then other figures then to say that official exclusions of autistic pupils have increased by nearly 60% since 2011. Now, this is a report from a particular charity, but it also reminds me of a project that, again, myself, Mickey Keenan, Carola Dillenberger, and Nicola Booth were involved in. And this was initially we had gotten some national lottery funding to look at children who had been or who were in danger of being excluded from school. And we initially assumed because of behavioural issues. So once we got the project up and running, what we soon found out was that we were dealing with a lot of children who hadn't been excluded because of their behaviour, but who had excluded themselves because of depression and anxiety. So it ended up the bulk of the children we work with on that project were self-excluding from school and not being excluded by the school themselves. And the worrying thing from our perspective was at the time of that particular project, those children who had been excluded by the school were officially recorded as having been excluded by the school, but those children who excluded themselves weren't recorded as being excluded. So there's a huge number of children who were self-excluding from school that weren't being officially recorded. And again, getting back to mums and dads, think about the pressure and the stress that they're under every morning, trying to get their child to go to school, having to leave work to pick up their child who's left school, or coming home in the evening, trying to get homework done, all those different things that we sort of take for granted ourselves. There's a huge amount of issues around stress for parents and schooling as well. And again, looking at the sort of a very up-to-date paper, Blackwell 2024, looked at the impact of school challenges on parental employment with kids with ASD. And the findings were basically that families with children on the autism spectrum often experience financial pressures and tend to earn less across the board. The study found that formal and informal school exclusion, including permanent expulsions and occasions of the child being sent home from early, impact parental employment. So if you're constantly having to make excuses to your boss to leave and go and pick up your kid, and then it comes to maybe promotions, etc., then you can understand why a lot of those parents are starting to struggle and not progressing as they would like. The study also finds that child school refusal, or the reluctance from the child to attend school, is another way that school-related challenges impact parental employment. Okay, so that's where the child is self-excluding as opposed to being excluded from the school. And child school refusal and child behaviours which may lead to formal and informal school exclusions are identified as consequences of lacking school support, understanding and flexibility. So a lot of the families who were in this particular study felt that the school didn't have a full understanding of the situation and the difficulties that they were facing, and felt that maybe the school wasn't particularly sympathetic, which again is going to lead to high stress levels for those particular parents. Now, that quick overview allows us to see that, again, this is a very vulnerable group of individuals that we need to look after. But the vast majority of parents are coping. They're doing okay. They're getting through day to day. They're struggling. It's not easy for them, but they are coping. And what I wanted to look at was the difference between those parents who could cope and those parents who were maybe struggling. So this study by Vernet, etc., and et al. In 2019 did a systematic review, and their studies highlighted that parents of a child with ASD used more avoidance strategies and less social support seeking strategies than those of typical children. So, for example, what would tend to happen would be the parents of children with ASD would avoid situations. So, for example, they maybe wouldn't think of going into a coffee shop in case their child had a temper tantrum. They maybe wouldn't take their child to a swimming pool because of those same reasons. So what happens is they were avoiding a lot of situations that they didn't want to have bad experiences. Or it could be then that the parents stayed at work for longer to avoid having to come home or whatever it might be. So those avoidance strategies were very common. And another issue then with those families was that they were less likely to seek social support than families of typical children. So what they were tending to report in this particular study was that they felt that their child was maybe behaviourally, difficult, and they would be more reluctant to ask Granny and Granda to look after them at the weekend than they would for a typically developing child, or they would be less likely to ask friends to look after their child because they thought it's going to be more difficult because of the child and because of the ASD. So there you go. They have a huge issues going on there with the families, that they're not able to access support in the same way as other families. But the interesting thing was that families who had problem-focused coping mechanisms were protected against parental stress and improved quality of life. So those families who had proactive methods to work with their child had a much better mental health outcome and much better quality of life than those families who used the more avoidant tactics when it came to actually coping strategies for working with their child. Again, this then leads into other research. So, for example, Dunn et al. Noted that parents of children with autism experience more stress and are more susceptible to negative outcomes than parents of children with other disabilities. Again, all these papers are all saying the same thing. Now, this was interesting because they examined the relationship between stressors, social support, locus of control, coping styles, and negative outcomes such as depression, social isolation, and spousal relationship problems. And what they found was that the higher the levels of depression, they were correlated with low feelings of control and avoidance as a coping strategy. So those families or those parents who felt like everything was out of control and there was nothing they could do in order to help their child, those were the families who had a lot of avoidance as a coping strategy, but also those families who had higher levels of depression. So when the parents didn't feel in control of a situation, it put them into a very negative place. Those same low feelings of control and escape as a coping strategy were also correlated with increased feelings of social isolation. So those families who felt then, just like we had in the previous paper, that they couldn't ask family, they couldn't ask their neighbours to look after their child, or didn't feel that they were in a position to do that. Again, they kind of felt that loss of control. And just that whole idea of social isolation I think as well, especially in Northern Ireland, I mean, 36% of our population live in rural communities. So we're still a very rural society in a lot of ways. And we have to take into consideration that, as well as those sort of feelings of social isolation, we sometimes have parents who are physically isolated. They really are, miles and miles away from maybe other members of family, miles away from other support. I remember going out and doing home visits sometimes, and you were just driving down little country roads for miles on end thinking I couldn't possibly have taken the right road, and then you suddenly find yourself on a little isolated farm somewhere. And I remember driving away maybe sometimes from those families thinking, my goodness, if they were ever in a situation where they had to pick up the phone and ask for somebody to drop around and give them a bit of help, is there anybody there that will be there to do that? So again, taking this into consideration with those feelings of social isolation, especially if we're dealing with a large rural population, we might have to take that physical isolation into context as well. And then lastly, then in the Dunn et al. Paper, low levels of social support were further correlated with increased levels of spousal relationship problems. Okay, so that's where we kind of feed into the issues with the kind of the marriage breakdowns and all those related issues there as well. In a similar paper, Hastings et al. 2005 identified types of coping strategies used by parents. So again, we have those active avoidance coping strategies where the parents will either avoid doing something, stay at work late, go out for a drink, and don't go home. All those sort of classic avoidance strategies. Those would be very common in the Hastings paper, just as they were in other papers. Problem-focused coping. So again, those families who were given proactive methodologies to work with their child was a different type of coping mechanism. Some people engage in what Hastings referred to as positive coping. Now, positive coping is where people kind of put a different sort of spin on things and say, like, yes, my child has some behaviours that will be of concern, but he also has very gifted sort of abilities as well, and they'll tend to focus on that, or they'll tend to sort of see, the more sort of positive side of things. And there is a certain amount to be said for that, and those families probably coped a bit better than the active avoidance families. And then we also had a situation where people would either engage in denial, who would just refuse to believe that anything's wrong with the child, or they might grow out of it, or whatever way they engage in denial, or they'll have some sort of religious understanding of it. So I've worked with parents in the past who've said that the condition has been sent along, it's God testing them, and it's a test from God, and He'll look after them as well. But again, a different way of coping. But of all those different coping strategies, needless to say, it was the problem-faced coping strategies that worked the best. Those proactive techniques were the techniques that had the most beneficial impact on mental health for the family. And a couple of interesting points from this particular paper. Mothers in this particular study were more likely to use problem-solving strategies than the dads, but there was no difference in levels of emotional responding across both mums and dads. So some interesting stuff going on there. Now, the reason I've gone over those papers is because, as behaviour analysts, we have been teaching those proactive strategies for a long time, okay? And I've deliberately kind of put up papers that are a wee bit kind of old here, just to kind of demonstrate that we have been talking about these things for a very long time. We're going into family homes and we're teaching parents strategies about how to deal with issues. And if a parent understands and a parent knows why their child is doing something, if a parent's able to turn around and say, I know that that's social attention-seeking behaviour, therefore I have to deal with it this way, as opposed to, I know that that's now slightly different and it's escape avoidance and I have to deal with it in a different way. We give the parents those tools to be able to do that, and that has a huge impact on their mental health. And as I say, the evidence has been there for a long time that this is the case. So, for example, Cagle et al., going back as far as 96, talks about, you put these interventions into place and they reduce family stress. There's better outcomes in non-verbal behaviour, so that's Anderson and Romanchik. Better verbal communication, Stammer and Gist, 2001. And you'll know yourselves, when it comes to working with families, if you can put into place some level of communication, should that be picture exchange, should that be sign language, should that be rudimentary vocal behaviour, once we have communication going between the child and the parents and the parents and the child, that in itself can have a huge impact on a lot of behavior issues. A lot of those behavior issues disappear when a child is able to express what it is that they want, when a parent is able to understand what a child wants. That in itself can have a huge impact on behavioral issues. So that's really important. Lutsker and Steve talked about these proactive methods for dealing with general behavior. And again, if you suddenly find yourself as a family that when you're out shopping, you're not concerned about going into the coffee shop, you're not concerned about going to the cinema or the swimming pool, that in itself would seem on the face of it to be very simple, straightforward things for those of us who don't have a child with any sort of a disability. That can be a massive thing for those families. High levels of appropriate play skills. Love to watch kids being able to play and entertain themselves. Again, we can do those things with the proactive techniques. Joint attention, a lot of really lovely stuff on joint attention and how we can actually teach that to kids and therefore allow them to kind of function more independently in their environment. So Vismara and Lyons from 2007. Imitation and social responsiveness. If you can get a kid to imitate, that's like a really fast way for teaching things. You get your verbal imitation, your motor imitation, your object imitation. If you can get kids to imitate, it's a really powerful tool. So being able to do that, again, those proactive tools can all have a massive reduction in stress levels for families. And then this is the really important thing. Greater levels of positive parent-child engagement. And this is a huge thing where suddenly we have families who are turning around and saying, like, you've really, I've got a relationship with my child now. It's not like every time I walk into the room, it just seemed like a pitched battle the whole time. I couldn't understand him, he couldn't understand me, and we were at loggerheads the whole time. All of a sudden, I've got my child back. He'll sit and he'll have a cuddle with me. We'll sit down and we'll watch a TV show together, and we'll watch a movie. And and that's lovely to hear that when parents are able to report those things back, and that in itself can have a huge reduction then in levels of stress among the family. So, Carola mentioned this earlier on about the Simple Steps project. Simple Steps was a multimedia package that it initially came out in 2005. So myself and Mickey and Carola again applied through Pete and Queen's University and Ulster University to get some funding because we wanted to make a multimedia training tool for parents because we knew all this stuff. We knew that these proactive teaching methods were able to help parents. But unfortunately at the time, I was the only behaviour analyst in Northern Ireland. So I was running around like a headless chicken from one end of the country to the other, trying to put interventions in the families. And we thought, well, what's a better way to get that information out there if we created a multimedia pack? So Children in Need and another organisation gave us the money in 2005 to create the pack. And that's exactly what we did. And we gave away 1,000 free copies of the pack in Northern Ireland. And that was in 2005. And then in 2008, I was then working at Ulster University. And again, through sort of Mickey and Carola and Queen's and UU, we put together some funding proposal with the Erasmus fund and the Leonardo da Vinci Lifelong Learning, apologies. And we were able to get funding then to expand the original pack from 2005, but also then bring on board Spanish partners and Norwegian partners and German partners to have Simple Steps in their own language. And that was very successful. And then in 2011, we applied for further funding for Leonardo da Vinci again, and this time around we brought on board Dutch partners, Icelandic partners, Italian partners, and Swedish partners, and we were able to bring about Simple Steps packs in those particular languages. And the really important thing from our point of view was that our goal or our dream had always been that if a family went to the doctor and said, I'm a bit concerned about my child, that even if it was on prescription or whatever, a family would be given access to Simple Steps. So instead of waiting for a diagnosis and spinning your wheels for 18 months, like we said earlier on, here's this pack. Why don't you start start understanding your child's behavior and putting things into place that are going to make life better for their child and for your family as well. And that's always been our dream. But the interesting thing is that in Iceland, the state diagnostic clinic in Reykjavik, every family who comes in with a query of autism spectrum disorder is given simple steps. So they're doing in Iceland what we would love to do here. And furthermore, as well as the countries that we brought on board in 2011, another number of countries also came along self-funding to basically say, can we do a translation of simple steps? So we have a Portuguese version, we have a French version, and we have a Czech version. And the interesting thing is, similarly as they have in Iceland, the Czech Republic, because they have a private healthcare system, their private healthcare companies will provide simple steps free to any family who queries ASD with their child. And I think that's really important. As soon as a family is told, we believe your child has a diagnosis of ASD, a lot of families feel like they don't get enough information. A lot of families feel they don't get enough support. Whereas by giving them simple steps, they're immediately taught about these particular strategies they can put in place for their child. And I don't have time to show it this evening, but there's one little clip. It lasts about 4 minutes, and it's just a little stick figure of a child having a temper tantrum. And what we do is we fade in the context. So in one context, it's social attention, then we fade that out, and in another context, it's escape avoidance, and then in another context, it's trying to access reinforcers. And that simple 3.5 minute clip, every time we went to these different countries to launch simple steps, that was the clip. You could just see the parents going, I understand my child's behavior now. And that's such a huge thing. That as soon as the parents can understand why my child's doing what they're doing, it gives them such a boost. And instead of it's me versus autism spectrum disorder, it's now, that's social attention. He's looking there. I know how to handle that. That's a very powerful thing for families. And when we did a little bit of feedback with the families, we asked them for some feedback on the Simple Steps pack, and they said that it was great because it helped them understand their child's behavior, which was the big thing. It helped to decrease inappropriate behavior. They were able to teach new skills and made sure that they reinforced the appropriate skills. It was easy to understand and use. This is one of the things that we were very adamant about, that we wanted Simple Steps to be built in such a way that if a parent watched it, who had no idea about behavior analysis at all, but if that parent watched it, they would go, I understand that. Whereas if a professional behavior analyst watched it, they would go, that's scientifically correct. And the parents then also reported that it was easy to understand and use, and it made a significant difference to their child and their family. And the resource was also available continuously because it was online at this stage and therefore easily accessible when required. So that's the work we've been doing on Simple Steps since 2005. It's currently available online. We updated the website, and you can see here then these are the different countries where it's available, or the languages it's available. It's also free. Okay, so if anybody is, and I notice there's some people here from all over the States and Ethiopia and all sorts of wonderful places. But if you log on to, and the website's there, so simplestepsautism.com, if you log on to that, you'll be able to sign up for a free parent course where you can give it to the parents that you work with. It's available for free. Our goal is just to make it available to everybody. Nobody owns the science of behavior analysis. We've always just wanted to share it with everybody. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So if you're working with any families, get them onto that. Let them access that free resource. And it's lovely as well from your point of view that if you're coming around to a family home saying, I'm coming around tomorrow because I'm going to be putting in place a differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior program with your child. Watch the video and you'll understand what it is before I arrive. So it's a really useful bridge between you guys as the behavior analyst professionals and the families that you're working with. If anybody's interested, it sort of comes in two parts as well. So we've got the free family pack, but there's also another part of the program, which is it's for the European behavior analyst qualification. And the person can then complete that course and get the certificate at the end of it as well. So they can come out with it's a sort of European equivalent of an RBT qualification moving forward. So from a content point of view, we have real stories. Now, I cannot stress how important that is. I would love to be able to walk around to a family home with a whole load of book chapters and scientific papers and go, there's all the evidence that this works. That might work for a behavioral nerd like me, but it doesn't work with a family. A family want to see other families who have been in their position and coming out the other side of things. They want to see videos of kids that will remind them and look like their kids. So it's really important that we have those real stories out there. We have a little section then explaining about ASD and how applied behavior analysis addresses that. Very important then, chapter 4, understanding behavior. As I say, once the parents understand their behavior, that's a huge step forward for them. Measuring behavior is a key issue as well. We want parents to be able to measure behavior in order to evidence for them that the programs they're putting in place are actually working. So it's important that we do that. Then from the point of view of parents, one of the first things we want to do is we want to make sure that they copper fasten all the good things that their child's already doing. They maintain the good skills and they teach new skills. And this is probably one of the things I've learned to do with families over the years, that if I go into a family home for the first time and I say to them, what are you worried about? They will just give me a million things that they're worried about. So one of the first things I'll do is I'll say, now listen, we're going to get to the things you're worried about in a wee minute. But the first thing I want you and your partner to do is to sit down, get a pen and paper, and I want you to write down all the things that your child is good at. Because we need to refocus them to understand that their child has a lot of really important skills. And more importantly, who do you think taught your child how to do that? Well, you did. Okay, so you already know how to work with your child. Sometimes my job is to come in and be a little bit more systematic about things and a little bit more scientific about things, but you know how to work with your child. And I'm just here to help you through some of the stuff you're not too sure about. That in itself can be a huge thing for a family when they step back from all the problems that they're having and they realize, we've got a good kid here. And as I tell them, I've been doing this for nearly 30 years. I've never met a child who has more inappropriate behaviors than appropriate behaviors. Okay, I've never met a child who's been in that situation. They all do good stuff. And what we want to do is we want to teach the parents to catch that good behavior and make sure then that they are in a position where we can build on those sorts of things. And then, we come to the stage then where maybe there are pieces of behavior that we want to reduce. And as I explained to the parents, we want to make sure that when we remove a piece of behavior from a child's repertoire, we leave a behavioral vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum, and another piece of behavior is going to fill that vacuum. So we want to make sure that it's an appropriate, functionally equivalent piece of behavior that replaces that. So instead of a child getting attention by coming up and shoving mum or dad, they come up and tap them on the shoulder. They get exactly the same function, but it's done in a more appropriate way. And then we have a guidebook with lots of, there's a glossary and data sheets and all, and toileting sheets and bedtime routine sheets and all sorts of things that can be printed off. So the bottom line is we've got a tool here. So we know from the research that families who've been given proactive strategies have better mental health outcomes. Families who are involved in an ABA program with their child tend to have better outcomes. And what we've got here is a tool that can allow us to do that. Again, I say to the parents, it's all about understanding behavior. But I love this slide. I say to parents, if I leave today and you only remember one thing, make sure it's this slide here. Because not only when we look at the antecedent behavior consequence from an ABC data point of view, it's a fantastic way of understanding your child's behavior. It's also a brilliant tool for teaching behavior. So antecedent, give the instruction, behavior, child engages in a correct response, consequence followed by a reinforcer. it's just your 3-term contingency for a discrete trial. Or it could be just basically things done a little bit kind of more loose teaching as you're walking down the road, generalizing things, going, what colour is that car? Oh, it's blue. Brilliant. You're taking it away from the tabletop or whatever it is, and you're bringing it into the community, and you're generalizing that. And that's a key role of parents, that they can generalize and they can copper fast and then reinforce a lot of the things that we're teaching the kids when we're working with them. So again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, in a fairly sort of soft way, bring in the science. And if we know the families are good at the basic science, then that'll keep them right. Okay, I'll chat about that a wee bit later on. Again, sometimes the parents, when we talk about data-driven decisions and collecting data, that can kind of freak them out a wee bit. But I'll bring them around and we'll just put an A4 page on the fridge door, and we'll put a mark on it every time something happens. And I go, that's all I want you to do. That's data collecting. That's being it's science, but it's not rocket science. Okay, trying to make things as simple and straightforward for the families to understand. And the importance of data and data-driven decision-making is a huge aspect of that. Now, I show this to my PhD students. I show this to my master's students, and I show this to my undergraduate students, and I say to them, this is the scientific model, and this is what I want you to do. But it also works for parents as well. It works for us when we go and visit parents. So again, this is a very important way that what we want to do is we want to teach the parents the basic science. And if they look after the basic science will look after them as well, is the way I always think about it. So the first thing we want to do when we go into a family home is we want to select a behaviour. What are the things that the family want to focus on? So we get all the background, the reports from the social worker, the reports from the school, reports from whoever else. We'll establish and prioritise our goals and objectives. Now, again, sometimes that might be where you kind of have to sometimes talk to the family and say, look, I think we have to look at this in a different way. So I've been around to family homes, for example, where the mother's been sitting going, I want to work on a number program, and I want to work on getting the wee guy to go up to have a bath, and I want to cut down on the amount of time he's playing his Xbox. And as I'm talking to mum, she's yawning and she's got big black rings under her eyes. And I'm saying, listen, mum, I think we'll get to those in a wee while, but the first thing we need to do is maybe sort out the bedtime routine for you guys. How long does he sleep for? Oh, he goes to bed for about an hour and a half, and then that's his battery completely recharged, and then he doesn't sleep for the rest of the night. And I'm going, I know you're worried about maths and bath time and all those other things, but I genuinely think that we need to work on the bedtime routine first, because once you have your energy and once you have a bit of sleep, you're going to be in a much better position to put those other programs into place. And again, because we're dealing very much with individual families, we want to analyze the system. Is granny there to help? Are mum and dad both at home? Does one of the parents work night shifts, which means that the whole timetable's all over the place? We need to figure out what's going on with each of those families and take those things into consideration. Then we want to measure the behaviour. Again, this is just getting the parents to think scientifically. But sometimes they'll say, my wee Mary always does something. But when we measure the behaviour, it's not as much as they think. Or my wee Johnny never does something. But when we actually measure the behaviour, he does it more than they think. It's getting them to be aware that measurement can be a very powerful tool. And we'll select our measurements. Is it going to be frequency? Is it going to be duration? Is it going to be inter-response time? Is it going to be latency to respond? We'll figure out all our percentage correct if we want to use a slightly different way of doing things. But we'll start teaching the parents about measuring behaviour. And then we'll select our treatment strategies. Now, this is really important. Normally, when I go into a family home, you get to a stage where you'll go into a situation and you've dealt maybe with a similar problem on a number of different occasions. What I like to do with the parents is I'll say to them, like, in behaviour analysis, we're really lucky. We've got loads of ways to improve behaviour, and we've got loads of ways to decrease behaviour as well. Now, in this particular situation, on one occasion, I used positive reinforcement. On another occasion, I had to use shaping. On another occasion, I had to use chaining. And you give the parent maybe 4 or 5 different examples of how you've dealt with a similar problem in the past. And then you can talk to the family and say, like, because of the family dynamic that you have, because of the working stresses or whatever else you have going on in your life, which of these strategies do you think you guys are going to be able to put in place in your family home? Because there's no point in me giving a brilliant program that a family's going to struggle to implement. I would rather give them a program that they can put in place, but allowing them to see that there are options and which one's going to work best for that family. It's important that we're able to do that. Identify current contingencies. Another thing, I think sometimes we're so obsessed with a piece of behavior happening that we forget to look at when it doesn't happen. So I'm saying to the families, like, it's a behavior always happening. Well, what does it look like when the behavior is not happening versus what does it look like when the behavior is happening? So we have two different sets of contingencies. One where the behavior occurs and one where the behavior doesn't. Are there things from this set of contingencies that we can move over here to make sure that it also happens in this situation, or from here to here that means that it doesn't happen in this particular situation? And again, just getting the families to kind of think, in that nice kind of scientific way, but introduce to them in a kind of nice soft manner. Selecting materials. I mean, we're not expecting families to go out and buy expensive flashcards. I mean, one of the things we used to always do was to teach the parents to make their own materials. And then if it worked really well, they could pass them on to another family, or maybe they don't work for that family. Maybe this family was using pictures of pigs to teach their child to count, but another family, the other wee kid doesn't like pigs. So what's the point? Get cards that mean something to them. So teaching the families to create their own materials, write their own social stories, and all sorts of wonderful things. What we're trying to do is we're trying to give the parents the tools to allow them to work on all these various bits and pieces. Then we put the strategies into place, and if the behaviour is increasing as we want it to, brilliant. If it's not, let's make a change. Okay, so we don't want a situation where, at the start of an academic year, a child's IEP is to improve their social skills, and then we get 6 months later and find out that nothing's changed. That's a long time for a program to be going wrong. We should know after 2 or 3 sessions if something's not working, and we change it immediately. And then lastly, we don't want a child or a young person being on an intervention forever. Eventually what we want to do is we want those behaviours to be controlled and maintained by the natural contingencies. So the number of kids that I work with, for example, who initially didn't like the idea of pencil skills, and we use lots and lots of reinforcement and lots of prompting and lots of lovely lessons, and now those children enjoy writing as a reinforcer, they enjoy drawing as a reinforcer, they enjoy colouring in as a reinforcer, and all the natural contingencies are at play there. So, I'll sit with my PhD students and I'll go through it and experiment and say, this is what we're going to do. And we follow this scientific model. It's exactly what we do when we go into a family home. So it's really important that, as I say, what we're trying to do is we're trying to teach the parents how to think in a scientific way. Another part of our job then is that regardless of setting, a critical skill of a good behaviour analyst is balancing the multiple needs of the child and their family simultaneously and knowing what proportional weight to give these various factors at any one point in time. So working with a family, do you have to give more emphasis to social skills? Is it more emphasis to behavioural things? Is it more emphasis to kind of health behaviours, eating behaviours, sleeping behaviours? You'll know yourself that, not everybody's curriculum is going to look exactly the same, because not every family and their needs is going to be the same. And therefore, it's our job to help the family sort of prioritize those. And as I say, just be careful that maybe a family have a set of priorities, which, don't get me wrong, is incredibly important. But if you think that something like, for example, a lack of bedtime routine is going to seriously negatively impact those things, then we really sort of have to step in and advise the family, look, this is the best way to move forward. And as you say, no single program or set of materials can fully prepare a behaviour analyst to make optimal decisions for each individual child. Sometimes we just have to kind of teach parents to make their own materials, write their own bespoke social stories, create those things. And the lovely thing about that is the more you do that, the better your imagination becomes, the better the ideas that you have. You take ideas from other people and you just basically bring on board all this knowledge that you're able to bring in to the next home that you visit. No big surprise. We're kind of getting to the end now, but kind of thinking that as each child in their family is unique, we need to be sensitive to their needs. Okay, so very much, we need to go in and listen. That's one of the best skills you can actually develop as a behavior analyst, is to go in and listen. Sometimes it's things that happen things that you read between the lines, that you go, yeah, there's something important going on here that maybe the parent isn't necessarily telling me directly, but it's something I need to be cognizant of and bring that on board. So it's really important that, we don't go in and go, I'm the behavior analyst, this is how we do things, this is my normal program. That would be a ridiculous way of doing things. We need to go in and make sure that we listen and try and read between the lines where we need to. Again, we want to make sure that we have a rounded education. So that could be the social aspects of an individual's program that we're working on. Communication is a huge one. Like, as I said before, that can have a massive impact on a lot of behavioral issues. Self-help, a lot of families, just to have their child being independent, to be able to go into the kitchen and make themselves a sandwich when they're hungry is a massive thing for those families. The idea of maybe being able to live in sheltered accommodation, but to look after their own money, to wash their own clothes, to cook for themselves, all those things are hugely important. And then we'll maybe have the classic sort of pre-academic and academic skills that we're working on with a lot of families. But we want to make sure that we take steps to ensure that the behavior is reinforced by natural contingencies. I always remember teaching a young lady how to make a toasted sandwich. And one of the early stages was just making a regular sandwich before we got the toasting machine out. And she went home for lunch one day and she made her dad a sandwich. First time, this girl was 23, had an acquired brain injury and ASD, and she made her dad a sandwich. And I always remember the dad came in and he said to me, he says, there was a big blob of butter in the middle of the bread, and there's a bit of cheese and a big piece of ham about that there thick, and then the sandwich looked like it had been cut by a chainsaw. And he goes, do you know what? He says, that was the most beautiful sandwich I've ever had. And I just thought, that's fabulous. So, and now this girl can do toasted sandwiches, she can make spaghetti bolognese, she can cook dinners from scratch. She had to start somewhere. And that was one of her first times. She was so delighted that she could make a sandwich. She wanted to show her dad that she could make a sandwich. And I thought that was a lovely story. And, things that might seem very simple and straightforward to us can have such a meaning for the families and the parents that we're working with, that those things can be huge. They can be huge. So take the time to kind of enjoy those things when you get a chance to experience them. So what I'm basically talking about is that when we go into a family home, yes, probably our number one priority is the child or the young person that we're going in to work with. But we're going into a family home. The family are bringing us into their private world, and they're sharing a lot of stuff with us. So what we're doing is we're building a relationship with that family. And the best thing we can do is we can shape the parental behavior. Give them small things they can work on. Give them small wins. What we're doing is to say we're shaping the behavior and we're reinforcing their behavior. And if they can get a small, quick win, then we've got them bought in. So I remember working with a family, and the mother came in and was just exhausted and went, I don't know what I'm going to do this week. And I said, well, what's something we can work on? And she said, well, when he watches the TV, he jumps up and down the sofa, and he fell off last week onto a stone floor and nearly broke his arm. And I said to her, well, tell you what, when you're watching TV tonight, when he's jumping up and down, turn the TV off, and when he sits back down, turn the TV back on. She came back in the next day to the nursery, a different woman. She was like, he sat down last night and watched the TV with me. Oh, that's brilliant. What we'll work on next? And then we just worked on progressively more and more complex things. And she suddenly realized, I can do something to help my child. And that was just us had that perfect connection and going, you're looking for the help and I can help you. And we had a great kind of working relationship after that. Because what we're doing is we're trying to teach the parents the basic science. So we don't teach parents to teach their children to discriminate colours. We teach the parents to teach their children to discriminate. So they don't have to come back and say, I've done colours, how do I do shapes? We want the parents to be conceptually systematic. We want them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, which is really important. Another huge thing I tend to do with the parents is sometimes dad kind of gets moved out into the periphery and it's like a bit of a kind of sideline figure. And we do so the child usually goes to the mum, and one of the things I'll always do is I'll always have programs just for dads, something that's important to the child and the father. Usually it's a bit of play or an activity they can do together, but to make dad feel that he's included and to make dad feel that he's an integral part of what's going on from the get-go, it's hugely important. So I always put a program specifically in for dads. The power of a story, I can't stress this enough. If I go into a family and I say to them, here's the definition of a differential reinforcement of a zero rate of responding, I've lost them. But if I go in and I say, listen, I worked with this wee guy once, and wait till you hear this, what he did, and I tell him a nice wee story, and we get to the end of the story, and I go, technically that's known as differential reinforcement of a zero rate of behaviour. They remember that. So it's really important. And as I say, if you go into a family home and there's an issue, and you can tell them 3 or 4 different stories about different techniques that you've used to address the same problem, that can give the family lots of options about things that are going to suit them as a family to include. And it's all about giving them a choice as well. Starting on day one with the family, teach them to catch the good behaviour, to recognise when there's good behaviour going on, because sometimes we're so obsessed with the things we're concerned about, we forget to reinforce all the good stuff. Listen. The family are going to really unburden themselves to you. It's what they're saying and maybe what they're not saying can sometimes give you the biggest clues as to what needs to be done with a particular family. And then that allows us to prioritise what's going on with that particular family. And a session should be built around the family, I believe. So you go in, review the data for what's going on, which programs are going well, which programs aren't going well. Maybe you watch mum and dad working with the child just to make sure they're doing it right. Then you jump in and work with the child. It's a generalization probe. If they're only doing something with mum and dad but not with me, that's problematic. So that's a nice opportunity to do a generalization probe. Introduce new programs. I'll show the family how to do the programs, and I won't leave until I'm happy that mum and dad are doing it properly. So we watch the parent, and then we review the visit before we leave. But the whole thing's very much based around the parents, because if we have the parents on board, it's going to be a much better program. If we give the parents those proactive techniques, it's going to have a huge impact not only on the child but on the mental health of the family. And I think because we're at a stage that statutory services are under so much pressure, we've got this brilliant resource, and the parents, they're not doing it for the money. They're not doing it for the glory. They're doing it because they love their child. They've got the most noble reasons for doing this. And that's a brilliant resource. And we shouldn't underestimate that. And we should be doing everything we can to make the most of it. I apologise, I've gone way over my time, but if I get excited about these things, it's very hard to stop me. So thank you.
I'm just coming back in again, Stephen. That was just brilliant. Thank you. I knew it would be brilliant, but it was even brillianter than I expected. That message at the end, I think, is just the most important message to get the parents involved and to listen to the parents and see the parental behaviour as a behaviour also to be shaped, but in a way that is actually useful and really centred on the culture of the family. I mean, there's cultures in families, even if they live in the same country, but there's obviously cultures in families that come from other countries as well, and increasingly we have those as well. So that was just great. Thanks very much. We have a couple of questions, if you still have a moment.
No problem.
There's more questions come in since I've put them in. I will start with. Zachary wanted to know, how can we emphasize that there is a vast amount of misinformation out there and the dangers misinformed practice can cause without damaging rapport with the parents who are motivated to do everything they can to improve their child's life? I think that's probably in the direction of if the parents have picked up on something that might they think might work, but it is actually misinformation. How do we actually get them dissuaded to...
Yeah, that's a huge issue. And I mean, really, to be honest with you, my best piece of advice in that situation would be to show parents that it works. So I always remember many years ago, I was setting up a TV and a video to give a talk to a group of parents. And as I was setting up the video, I kind of had this impression that somebody was behind me. And I turned around, and there was a lady, and she turned around, and her words to me were, "So, you're the infamous Dr. Gallagher then, are you?" And I went, "Well, I don't know about infamous, but I'm Dr. Gallagher, but I prefer if you call me Stephen." And she basically says, like, I don't agree in behavior analysis at all. And I said to her, I says, "Look, I haven't spoken yet. Listen to the talk today. Come up to me either at lunch or at the break or at the end. And if there's anything you disagree with, come up and ask me about it, and we'll talk it through." So that's the first important thing. Don't go into kind of whole big sort of defensive rant. Just say, listen to what I've got to say. This is what ABA really is, not maybe what you've read on the internet. So I gave my talk, and at the end, she came up and she said to me, "Oh, I didn't realize that what was behavior analysis was. Would you come round and visit my child?" And I went, "That's no problem at all. That's dead on. Phone the office, and we'll get an appointment sorted out." So what I tend to do is, as I say, when we go into a family home, we'll pick a simple piece of behaviour. It could be, for example, I find it very difficult to get my child to come back to the table after he's left, or sit down during dinner or whatever it is, and we'll go, right, okay, that's what we'll work on. And we'll show the parent how easy it is to change that behaviour. And then I'll say to the parent, "I want you to do it now." And then all of a sudden the parent is engaging in a little behaviour program, and they're seeing lovely changes in behaviour. That's what gets them. I could give a parent the national task report from America in 2019 that has published data coming from here, there, and everywhere. That's not going to impact a parent. A parent needs to see a change in behavior. They need to see that simple things that they can do can have an impact on behavior, and that it's simple things that they can do that's a benefit to them and a benefit to their child, and all those other things then just dissipate. So show them. That's my best advice. Learn by doing. Let them actually see that it works, and let them see what it actually is. I hope that answered your question. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. Zachary had a similar question, I think, just to while you're in the flow of this one. He was wondering how often, or did you ever encounter a family environment in which the maladaptive coping strategies were so resistant to parent training that you had to recommend an alternative strategy or just take a step back? It just wasn't getting anywhere. Or is your what you've described, has that worked every single time?
I can honestly say, in all the years that I've been going into family homes, I can count on the fingers of one hand how many times I went in to a family home and left with both mum and dad 100% on board. Maybe one parent was like, "Great, we're going to do this," and the other parent was like, "Oh, no, we're not doing this, or I don't like it." Hence, what I would have done is I would have tailored specific programs to that parent who wasn't fully on board, and I would do something specific for them that would be meaningful to them, and that usually sort of tended to bring them on board. But maybe more to your point is, I would usually sort of say to the parents, like, just as a wee experiment here, let's just do a little alternating treatment design almost. Let's do it your way for 20 minutes. Let's do it my way for 20 minutes and see what way this works. And if the child's behavior is completely different under the way that I wanted to do it compared to the way that they were doing it, where maybe they're inadvertently reinforcing behavior or not picking up on prompts or doing whatever, it's again, teach by doing. So they can clearly see that when this set of contingencies is in play, this is what the behavior looks like. If we do what you traditionally do, this is what the behavior looks like. And again, we just need to be really careful that, sometimes parents will feel guilty about the fact that they've done something wrong. And as I'll always tell them, I'll say to them, like, I didn't learn this stuff until I was a behavior analyst. I had to learn the science first. That's how I know it now. Have you trained to be? You haven't trained to be. So we're not expecting you to know this. This is something that everybody needs to learn, and don't feel bad about it. We all made mistakes when we didn't understand the basic science. So show people. It's hard to deny when they see the two different sets of behavior right in front of them.
There's probably no parent deliberately shapes up problematic behavior in their kids.
Absolutely not.
That might be, in fact, what's happened, but nobody does that deliberately. So it's
No.
just a question of changing it. Usama is asking an interesting question here, because if you get 40 hours of ABA for your child, right, it's a bit of, how many hours of parent training is typical?
Oh, no. Okay. So how to quantify that?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because I mean the 40 hours is it's just the average hours that was in an early study. Most kids don't get 40 hours of one-to-one, and probably shouldn't get 40 hours of one-to-one training anyway.
But I'm thinking from the point of view of when I'm in the family home. So say I'm in the family home for 2 or 3 hours for a weekly or a fortnightly visit to keep an eye on the program. That's not when I walk in and say to the parents right away, you off and have a cup of tea and go for a nice walk in the park. No, you're in here, and I'm going to watch you doing what you're doing, and you're going to watch me doing what I'm doing. So that parent training is built into parent training, and parent assessment is built into that kind of 40 hours there. And then, depending on, again, it depends on the family. So some families, it's the parent who's actually doing the 40 hours because they're in a position where, that's financially the only way they can do it. Whereas with another family, it could be they have ABA therapists coming in. Now, if it's a situation where they have ABA therapists coming in, one thing I will insist is that the parents are constantly doing generalization probes. So as I say, if it's the therapist is teaching the child to discriminate colours, I'll make sure that me and the mum and the dad and the kid will go out for a walk down the road, and we'll be doing all the what colour's that car, what colour's the post box, is that big or small, whatever the programs they're working on at the tabletop, I'll be showing them how to generalise them just as they're going about their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I think so, because it really just depends on the family circumstance. It probably changes also from 1 week to the next. I mean, one week you'll stay longer because things have gone more problematic. Another week maybe things are going quite smoothly and you don't have to do that much. The final question is from Caitlin here, and I think it's quite an interesting. What is your advice for building a successful parent training relationship or system when working in a clinic versus a home setting? So she's not, the parents, I suppose in a clinic, the parents aren't typically attending. So how do you get a good parent relationship when you're working in a clinic?
Okay, so yeah, we've had this conversation with clinics in the past where we're sort of saying about, well, what sort of emphasis do you give for parent training in order to do those generalization probes? And that's probably one of the things that I would do with the parents would be that I would sort of say to them, like, you'll bring the parent in and you'll say, okay, today we were working on these programs. This is what the data looks like. Would you be able to maybe try these at home? And let's see what kind of scores we're getting at home. If they're getting good scores, that's great. If they're not getting good scores, then this is exactly why we created things like simple steps. So, for example, Caitlin, there's no reason why you can't give parents access to that simple steps pack, the free parent version, and you could be sort of saying to them, in order to really get the greatest benefits from the program, if mom and dad could be generalizing this stuff at home as well, that would be absolutely fantastic. But start off really small. Start off even just with one program, and ask mom and dad just to do a couple of generalization probes with that, and come back and report that data back to you again. And again, it's exactly the same idea. You're shaping the behavior up. I mean, if I turn around, for example, and give the parent a big folder and went, here's all the programs we're working on, could you go and generalize those? Well, you're asking them to run before they can walk. So if you just start off with one simple program and get them to do that, because if especially in the United States, I know there are some organizations where the kid comes in and maybe does their ABA 9 to 3 or whatever, and then they go home. Is it part of the culture to have the parent training there? That may be something that needs to be looked at. But that could be
Yeah.
something the organisation could deliberately say, look, we're really going to focus on this, so that whatever happens in the school or the clinic is generalised to the home environment as well.
I mean, there are some logistical problems if parents are working or if so forth. But I think the idea of actually making sure that even in the clinic you have this same attitude towards the parents, that the parents know their kids best. They you know, as you said earlier on, they love their kids. That's their motivation. They don't do
But
it for anybody else.
we all have video cameras in our pockets.
Yeah.
You know, so you even say to the parents, take a wee video and WhatsApp it to me or do whatever. You know, and the parent maybe doesn't have to be there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They can email it over to you and it's waiting there for you in the morning.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, I think we've probably exhausted you. We've certainly got our value out of your talk. You've really pushed the boundaries.
Apologies.
I think no. This is wonderful. I think one of the things that comes across every time I hear you talk, and I've heard you a couple of times, is just that personable friendliness, and that just being equal with the parent. You're not putting yourself up there on a pedestal. You know, said I'm the behavior analyst, I know everything. You're putting the parents, okay, so you're trained in behavior analysis, they maybe not, they're trained in something else that you don't know. So there's a give and take, and there's an equal relationship. It's not a top-down relationship. Just one comment here from Zach. The minimum parent training at our clinic in the US is an hour monthly. Most parents, in my opinion, require more frequent bi-weekly or additional as needed. Lots of families shoot for the 1 hour per month. So it's when it's really regulated, you need to just try and break those really rigid boundaries up a little bit. And as Stephen said, use technology if need be to get extra curriculum activities from the parents as well. Listen, Stephen, I'll let you go. I know you've probably got things to do, and thank you so much. That was really, really useful. And for everybody, I hope you've got your attendance requirements met. If not, the video will be up. It takes a couple of days to render, so give us a wee bit of time to let the guys at Behaviour Live do their job. They usually do a wonderful job on editing those videos, or not editing what Stephen said, but just making sure that it's all clear and easy to see. And we'll also share the video then with our Facebook community and on our YouTube channel, so that people can actually have as much access to it. Caitlin comes in here. We do parent training bi-monthly at my clinic, so this is all amazing to be able to use in clinic. I'm not seeing a free parent version in the for the USA version on the website, so it says buy now. There's another version, learn now. Should I have parents buy this version? You don't have to use the English version. You don't have to use the UK. I think there's an American flag up there in it. Don't use the American version. If they just might have to get used to spelling behavior with a U. That's the only difference between. So use the English version, Caitlin, for your parents. It's free, and that's the. Marilyn is getting an hour. But it just shows me here, these questions are still coming in. We could be sitting here for a lot longer, Stephen, and maybe we'll have to have you back someday.
But think of it as a shaping program. Let me put it this way. It's easier to shape up a behaviour if it's already there than not at all. So the very fact that you've got maybe parents coming in for 1 hour means you've got 1 hour of parent training going. That means it's going to be easier to shape that up.
Mickey is coming in here as well, Mickey Keenan, who is the co-author of Simple Steps that Stephen's mentioned a couple of times, so he's saying that if there's an issue here, we'll go back to the computer guys that the webmasters and make sure that that's sorted. So if nothing else, you've alerted us to an issue that we need to look into on the Simple Steps website.
The UK version will be exactly the same as the US version, so
should be
go in through the UK version and it'll be free.
Yeah, and the course that Stephen was mentioning is a very low fee for the course, and that money all goes to Pete, who owns Simple Steps and who uses that money just to update the website and pay the webmaster and things like that. None of us gets any of that money at all, because we are academics, we get our wages, and that's good enough. So just in case anybody was worried about that. Okay, so Okay, Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank
I'll
you for
let you
the
go.
invite, and thank you
And
everybody for coming along. I really enjoyed that. So hopefully it's got
yeah,
something
that
useful
was.
out
I
of it.
mean, everybody's just if you check the chat here, Stephen, everybody's just really appreciative. So thanks very much. And all you have to do is just press the leave the presentation button whenever you're done. Thanks a million.
Perfect.
Okay,
Pleasant. Thank you, Nick.
speak soon.
Okay.
Okay,
Take
bye
care,
bye
everybody.
bye
Bye. Bye.
bye.